Good evening. Great to be learning with you on a Monday. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Monday? Big Duff. Yehuda in South Carolina. Joe in Inland Empire. Shandor in the Bronx. Bill in Missouri. Melissa in Great Neck. Guy in Ohio. Lucy in Minnesota. Belle in Texas. Bella in Florida. Sharon in New Jersey. Frank in San Pedro. Chaim in Florida. Aoife in Florida. Moishi in Brooklyn. Nancy in North Carolina. Elise in Virginia. Lester in Florida. Franco in Kenya. Here to bring support to educational activities and orphanages. May you be strengthened in that beautiful work, Franco. Ella in Southern California. Marie in New York. And Moishi wishing us all an easy fast. Tomorrow is the 10th of Teves. I don't mistake. I think that's when the siege of Jerusalem began that led to the destruction of the second temple. I'm pretty sure of that. I ought to look it up. Somebody look it up for us and put it in the comments. I'm pretty sure it's the beginning of the siege of the second temple that eventually led to its destruction. It's a minor fast, so it's not a 25-hour fast like Yom Kippur or Tisha B'Av, and it comes in the winter in the northern hemisphere, which makes it relatively short. You can get up really early before dawn and have some breakfast, and then the break fast, is going to be here in California, I don't know, something like 5:30, more or less. So not so onerous like a summertime daytime fast or a complete fast like Yom Kippur. Okay, let's get into it. We're doing one page. It's a relatively long page, but I think we're going to hit our stride and it won't actually take so very long. Okay, our daf today is page 108. We're picking this up at the bottom of near the bottom of page 107a, continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 13. Chapter 13, we're talking about these prohibitions on slaughtering, or two separate prohibitions: slaughtering an animal for the purpose of bringing it as an offering, and offering it up. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about what offering up actually means. But those would be separate prohibitions. If one slaughters an animal for the purpose of an offering, and then one offers it up, both outside the holy temple, right, even for the purpose of serving God, or especially for the purpose of serving God, but outside of the designated area, which would be the holy temple. Once we have a holy temple, or a tabernacle, when we have the tabernacle, then you violate this prohibition, and it is a kares-bearing prohibition, death at the hands of the heavenly court. Okay, an Amoraic dispute, right? So an Amoraic dispute means a dispute between Amoraim. Those are the sages of the period of the Gemara, approximately the year 200 to the year 500 of the Common Era. And that is distinguished from the Tanaim, right? Singular Amora, singular Tana. The Tanaim were the sages of the Mishnaic period, of the Mishna. So prior to the year 200 of the Common Era, starts in the late Second Temple period. Okay. An Amoraic dispute was stated with regard to one who offers up outside the temple a limb of an offering, and it does not have on it an olive bulk of flesh, but the bone completes the measure to make an olive bulk. Right, so the flesh ought to be offered up inside the holy temple on the altar. Bones are not what we offer up. Let's say when a burnt offering is brought on the altar in the holy temple, bones are not burned, but there could be parts of bones that are still attached to the flesh, and then they would go up. But it's the flesh that really matters. So here, if you have less than the requisite measure, you haven't violated this prohibition. But what they're arguing on is, okay, well, you have less than the requisite measure of flesh, but there is some bone attached to it. And together with some bone and some flesh, it's more than an olive bulk. So you have the minimum measure, although you don't have the minimum measure of flesh. So the Amoraic dispute was stated with regard to one who offers up outside the temple a limb of an offering. It does not have an olive bulk of flesh, but it has enough bone so that together the bone and the flesh comprise an olive bulk. Rabbi Yochanan says he is liable. Reish Lakish says he is exempt. So the Gemara explains. Rabbi Yochanan says that he is liable, right? Liable for violating this particular prohibition. Let's keep that in mind. He is liable as he holds that an item attached to flesh that must be offered up on the altar, for example, a bone that is attached to sacrificial flesh, is also regarded as an item that must be offered up on the altar because it's attached to the sacrificial flesh. Even though if it were to become detached, there would be no requirement to offer it up. Nevertheless, as long as it is attached to the flesh of the sacrificial animal, it is considered part of the flesh and it contributes to the required measure of an olive bulk. Therefore, it was offered up outside the temple. Therefore, if it was offered up outside the temple, it would trigger liability for violating this prohibition. Where am I? Reish Lakish says that he is exempt, as he holds that an item attached to flesh that must be offered up on the altar is not regarded as an item that must be offered up on the altar. Yes, the bone could go along with the flesh that is obligated to be offered up on the altar, but it doesn't have to go up. Rava raises a dilemma with regard to one who offers up outside the temple courtyard the head of a pigeon burnt offering that does not have on it an olive bulk of flesh, but the salt that adheres to it, after it was salted in accordance with the requirement to salt it, see Leviticus 2:13, completes the measure to make an olive bulk. So then what is the law? Is one liable for offering it up outside? Fascinating, right? Salt goes up with offerings. So if you don't have the right amount, you don't have an olive bulk, but when you take into account the salt, you do have the minimum measure, then, have you triggered liability for this offering, right? Does salt count toward the volume of flesh, which would trigger liability for an offering because you have the minimum measure? Rava from Parzakia said to Rav Ashi, is this not identical to the dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish with regard to a bone attached to sacrificial flesh? I don't think it's identical. I kind of skimmed over this earlier, so I don't remember the answer. Now I'm just working it through in my mind. I'm guessing that it's not identical because the bone is not obligated to be brought up. It's not part of the offering. It can go up because some of that bone is attached to the flesh, which must go up. Because we're talking about a burnt offering in the Holy Temple, right? So the flesh has to go up on the altar. When they butcher it, some bone will, inevitably go along with that flesh. It's not going to be a perfect butchering. And so some bone goes with it. But there's no requirement to send up the bones. Whereas salt accompanies all the offerings. There must be some salt with all the offerings. And so maybe salt can contribute to it. Maybe it doesn't, but the reasoning will be different. Let's see. Rav Ashi responded, no. The dilemma can be raised according to Rabbi Yochanan, and the dilemma can be raised according to Reish Lakish. And the Gemara explains, the dilemma can be raised according to Rabbi Yochanan. Perhaps Rabbi Yochanan states his opinion only there with regard to a bone, claiming that it contributes to the measure of an olive bulk, as it is of the same kind that flesh is, i.e. they're both parts of animals. But in the case of salt, which is not the same kind as a pigeon, perhaps it would not contribute to the measure. And the dilemma can also be raised according to Reish Lakish. Perhaps Reish Lakish states his opinion only there with regard to a bone, claiming that it does not contribute to the measure of an olive bulk, as if the bone separates from the flesh, there is no mitzvah to offer the bone up on the altar. But here, with regard to salt, concerning which, if it separates from the pigeon, there is a mitzvah to offer it up, then he would not rule as he does concerning a bone to attach to the flesh, or perhaps there is no difference between the cases. That's how the Gemara states the questions. It does not answer them. The Gemara concludes, this dilemma shall stand unresolved. They never answered it. Next topic. The Mishnah teaches, Rabbi Yosei HaGalili says, if he slaughtered an offering inside the courtyard, now this is going back to the Mishnah, right? In the Mishnah it said, if he slaughtered an offering out inside the courtyard and he offered it up outside the courtyard, he is liable for violating the prohibition on offering up and offering to God outside the holy temple. And it's a fit offering because he slaughtered it inside the temple courtyard and then he brought it outside the temple courtyard and offered it up. But, says Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, if he slaughtered it outside, thereby rendering it unfit and violating the first prohibition of slaughtering and offering outside the temple, and then he offered it up outside, he is exempt for from violating the prohibition of offering up, because what he offered up was already rendered unfit because it was slaughtered outside. Right? This was the minority opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, as he offered up only an item that is unfit, and one is liable only for offering up an item that is fit to be offered up inside the temple. The rabbi said to him, your logic doesn't work, because if you're saying the only thing that would trigger a violation of the prohibition on offering up to God outside the holy temple is an offering that is fit for offering up inside the temple, well, when you took that animal that was slaughtered inside the temple and you took its flesh outside the temple, right? You took it outside the courtyard. At that moment, you rendered it unfit. So according to your logic, if you're only liable for violating offering up when you offer up something that is fit for the altar, well, then that can never happen, because once you take it outside of the holy temple, you've already rendered it unfit. So there would never be violation of this. We know there is violation of this law, so that's why your analysis doesn't work, Rabbi Yosei. That's what the majority said to him. Now, other sages in the Gemara will come to Rabbi Yosei's defense. While a defense of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili's opinion is not presented in the Mishnah, various possibilities are recorded in a Baraisa. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who we know as Rebbe, responded to this challenge on behalf of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili. What is notable about slaughtering an offering inside the courtyard and then offering it up outside? It is notable in that the offering had a period of fitness. Can you say the same about slaughtering an offering outside and then offering it up outside, where the offering never had a period of fitness? It was disqualified as soon as it was slaughtered. And so it is reasonable that one is not liable for offering it up. Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, responded to this challenge on behalf of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili and said, what is notable about slaughtering an offering inside the courtyard and then offering it up outside? It is notable in that even though the offering was taken outside the courtyard and thereby disqualified, if it is, albeit unlawfully placed on the altar, the sanctity of the altar renders the offering acceptable, and it should not be removed from the altar because the disqualification occurred in sanctity, i.e. during the course of the temple service, right? If the flesh of the offering left the temple courtyard, it's rendered unfit. It should not be placed on the altar. But if it is placed on the altar, we'll leave it there because the altar then sanctifies it. Can you say the same about slaughtering an offering outside and then offering it up outside, where the disqualification did not occur in sanctity, and so the sanctity of the altar would not render it? If you slaughtered outside, you couldn't bring that in and put it on the altar. If you did, we'd take it off, right? Because the altar will not sanctify something that was not slaughtered in sanctity. So that's a big difference between slaughtered inside and slaughtered outside. Even though when you slaughtered inside and took it out, it would be rendered unfit. It's not as unfit as something that is slaughtered outside, because the one that was slaughtered inside, taken outside and brought back in, could remain on the altar if you put it there, whereas the one that was slaughtered outside and brought in would not remain on the altar if you put it there. We would still take it off. So the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference between these two responses? Zeri said the practical difference between them is... So what is the practical difference between these two responses? Zeri said, the practical difference between them is a case of slaughtering an offering at night inside the courtyard and then offering it up outside. Just a second. When did Rabbi Yehuda speak? Oh, they're talking about Rebbe. Okay. What is the practical difference between them, between these two responses? Zeri said the practical difference between them is a case of slaughtering an offering at night. We don't slaughter at night. We slaughter in the daytime. Inside the courtyard and then offering it up outside. According to Rebbe, one would be exempt as slaughtering at night disqualifies the offering from its very outset. Whereas according to the response of Rabbi Lazar, one would be liable as this is a disqualification that occurs in sanctity in the sense that it was done in the holy temple. Rabbah said the practical difference between them is a case in which after slaughtering the offering in the courtyard, the collection of the blood was done there in a non-sacred vessel, and then the animal was offered up outside the courtyard. So it had a period of fitness when it was slaughtered, but immediately the blood was collected in a non-sacred vessel, so that would disqualify it. Let's see. According to the defense offered up by Rebbe, one would be exempt as collecting the blood in a non-sacred vessel disqualifies the offering from its outset. Whereas, according to the response of Rabbi Lazar, one would be liable if he brought that up outside, liable for offering up outside, as this is a disqualification that occurs in sanctity, again, because it happened inside the temple courtyard, even though it was disqualified from the outset, like at night. Now, the Mishnah teaches one who is ritually impure, tameh, and who ate sacrificial food, whether it was tameh sacrificial food or tahor, right? Ritually impure or ritually pure. Tameh, ritually impure. Tahor, ritually pure. Whether it was tameh sacrificial food or tahor sacrificial food, he is liable to receive kares if he did so intentionally and to bring a sliding scale offering if he did so unwittingly. Rabbi Yosef HaGalili disagreed with the majority and says, an impure person, a tameh person who ate tahor, sacrificial food, he is liable. But an impure person who ate impure sacrificial food, he's exempt as he merely ate an impure item. And the prohibition against eating sacrificial food while one is impure applies only to pure sacrificial food. The majority said to him, according to your logic, even in the case of an impure person who ate what had been pure sacrificial food, once he touched it, he thereby rendered it impure, so by the time it went into his mouth, it was an impure person eating impure food. So why would he ever be liable? And we know he is liable, so that's why you're wrong, Rabbi Yosef. And the Gemara notes the rabbis are saying well to Rabbi Yosef HaGalili. Why does Rabbi Yosef HaGalili disagree with them? Rav said, in elaboration of the dispute, wherever one is first rendered impure with impurity of the body, and then afterward the sacrificial meat is rendered impure, everyone agrees that he is liable if he eats the meat. And this is because the prohibition due to the impurity of one's body, which carries the punishment of kares, took effect while the meat was still ritually pure. And so the prohibition is not abrogated even when the meat is later rendered impure. Where they disagree is in a case where first the meat is rendered impure and afterward the person's body is rendered impure. In general, once an item has become subject to a prohibition, it cannot then become subject to an additional prohibition. So in this case, once the meat is tameh, it is prohibited for anyone to eat it, even if that person is tahor. If that person is later rendered tameh, the meat should not become subject to the additional prohibition against a ritually impure person eating sacrificial meat. So Rav explains that Rabbi Yosef HaGalili and the rabbis disagree as to whether this case is an exception to that principle. As the rabbis hold that we say that since the prohibition due to tuma of one's body is a more inclusive prohibition, as it prohibits that person from eating all sacrificial meat, both pure and impure. It therefore takes effect also with regard to this meat, even though it was already rendered impure before the person was. And Rabbi Yosef HaGalili says that we do not say that since it is a more inclusive prohibition, it takes effect. The Gemara asks, but even according to Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, granted that we do not say that since it is a more inclusive prohibition, it will take effect, but still, the prohibition due to the impurity of a person's body, which is a more stringent prohibition, as it carries the punishment of kares, should come and take effect upon the prohibition due to the tomb of the meat itself. And that prohibition is less stringent, as it carries only the punishment of lashes. Right? If you are a pure person and you ate impure meat, lashes. If you are impure and you ate pure sacrificial meat, kares. And according to the rabbis, even if you're an impure person and you ate sacrificial meat that was also impure, it's still kares. The main thing is you're impure and you're eating sacrificial meat. Whether the sacrificial meat has been rendered tameh or not, if you are tameh when you eat sacrificial meat, kares penalty, according to the majority. One exception to the principle that a second prohibition does not take effect is that even if an item or person is already subject to a prohibition, if there's a more stringent prohibition, it can take effect with regard to it. And this is a case of a more stringent prohibition when we're talking about the tumah of a person versus the tumah of the sacrificial food. Rav Ashi said, from where is it apparent that the prohibition due to the tumah of the person's body is more stringent? Perhaps the prohibition due to the tumah of the meat is more stringent, as tameh meat does not have the possibility of purification in a mikveh, whereas a person who is tameh, he can become tahor. But sacrificial meat that was rendered tameh can never be eaten, can never be saved. Once food becomes tameh, you can't purify it. So that would be a good counter argument, but it was not enough to win the day. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 13. We move on to Mishnah number 2. There is a greater stringency with regard to slaughtering outside the temple courtyard than with regard to offering up outside the temple courtyard. And there is a greater stringency with regard to offering up outside the temple courtyard than with regard to slaughtering, right? So there's two prohibitions, slaughtering and offering up outside the temple courtyard. In one sense, slaughtering is a more stringent prohibition, and in another sense, offering up is a more stringent prohibition. So the Mishnah explains. The greater stringency with regard to slaughtering outside the temple courtyard is that one who slaughters an offering outside the temple courtyard, even for the sake of an ordinary purpose, is liable. What? One who slaughters outside for an ordinary purpose is liable to this prohibition we've been talking about? Ordinary purpose in this context does not mean slaughtering a kosher animal so that you can make dinner for your family. That's not what ordinary purpose means. Ordinary purpose in this context means you're still slaughtering up for the purpose of making a sacrificial offering, right? One case is a sacrificial offering to God. The other case is a sacrificial offering for idolatry, right? What they're saying here is, if you make an offering to idolatry, you've definitely violated the law against idolatry, right? That's not only a kares bearing prohibition, that's even death at the hands of the earthly court. If it was done intentionally, there was warning, etc. But that's not the prohibition that we're talking about here. The prohibition we're talking about in this chapter is offering up to God outside the holy temple. So what they're saying here is, yeah, but slaughtering up outside the holy temple, whether you do it for God or for some other deity, does trigger violation of this prohibition. Does not. Slaughtering for the purpose of idolatry is a sin, but it does not violate this law, because this law is only about offerings to God. okay, in terms of slaughter. The greater stringency with regard to offering up outside is that two people who grasped a knife and together slaughtered an offering outside the courtyard are exempt. But if two grasped a limb from an offering and together offered it up outside, they are liable. Let's just review this again. The greater stringency for slaughter outside the temple is that if you do it even for the sake of an ordinary purpose, i.e. not for God, you're liable. But one who offers up outside the courtyard for an ordinary purpose is exempt. Okay, slaughter, even for idolatry, does violate this prohibition because it's just slaughtering for the sake of an offering outside the holy temple. And offering up now has a different kind of stringency that's greater, and that is it's interesting. The greater stringency with regard to offering up is that two people who grasped a knife and together slaughtered an offering outside the courtyard are exempt. I see. But if two grasped a limb from an offering and together offered it up, they are both liable. Okay, so it's in terms of two people doing it together. If they both slaughtered, they're exempt. But if two people offered up a limb of an animal on an altar outside the holy temple, they would be liable. Right? If one unwittingly offered up an offering outside the courtyard, and then in a different lapse of awareness offered up other parts of that offering, and then again in another lapse of awareness offered up yet other parts, he is liable to bring a sin offering for each act of offering up. This is the statement of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yosei says he is liable to bring only one sin offering. Rabbi Yosei adds, and one is liable for offering up an offering outside the courtyard only once he offers it up at the top of an altar that he has erected there. Rabbi Shimon says even if he offered it up only on a rock or on a stone, not an altar, he would be liable. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Gemara analyzes the first law stated in our Mishnah. What is different about one who offers up outside the holy temple for the sake of an ordinary purpose that he is exempt? Okay, offers up, not to God, but some kind of other offering. Again, he violated the prohibition on idolatry, but he didn't violate the prohibition called offering up outside the holy temple. So why is that? As it is written, quote, and he will not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to sacrifice it to the Lord. That's why this verse only applies to sacrifices that are being brought to God. And sacrifices that are being brought to God, right? Not idolatry, but nevertheless, you can only do it in the holy temple. And if you bring it outside the holy temple, you violated this prohibition. Which indicates that the liability applies only to offering up for the sake of the Lord. Now, the Gemara questions this, but with regard to slaughtering, isn't it also written, or that slaughters it outside the camp and he did not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to sacrifice an offering to the Lord? So the Gemara explains it is different there with regard to slaughtering, as the verse states, any man of the house of Israel. So any man is how we're translating ish. The word ish means man. Right? So the way Hebrew works, biblical Hebrew, is that when it says, man who brings, why is it doubled that way? It's just some part of the syntax of Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, that we don't use in English or, even in modern Hebrew. Ish, a man who brings. It means like any man, right? But nevertheless, the Torah chose to convey that thought by doubling the word man, right? So ish. So ish of the house of Israel that slaughters it outside the camp. So the amplification that is indicated by the phrase ish, which you're translating as any man, teaches that one is liable even for slaughtering for the sake of some other purpose than God. It's an offering, therefore, if you're slaughtering it not for God, it's some form of idolatry. Now the Gemara challenges, but also with regard to offering up, it is written, Ish of the house of Israel, that offers up a burnt offering. So the Gemara explains, yes, but that amplification is necessary to teach that two people who offered up a limb of an offering together outside the courtyard are liable. You can guess the next question. The Gemara asks, if so, here too, with regard to slaughtering, the phrase ish should be used to teach that two people who grasped a knife and together slaughtered an offering outside the courtyard are liable, contrary to the ruling in our Mishna. Why are the two parallel phrases expounded in different ways? And the Gemara explains it is different there with regard to slaughtering, as the verse states, and that man shall be cut off from among his people. That man. The term that man, which is in the singular, indicates that only one who acts alone is liable, but not two who act together. Okay, but if so, also with regard to offering up, isn't it written, that man shall be cut off from his people? Why isn't that term also expounded to teach that only one who acts alone is liable? And the Gemara explains that term is necessary to exclude from the liability for karas one whose violation was unwitting, or who was compelled under duress to act, or who was mistaken when he acted. The term that man teaches that only one who offered up with intent is liable to receive karas. Has to be done intentionally for karas. The Gemara challenges, okay, well, if so, here too, with regard to slaughtering outside, the term is necessary to exclude one whose violation was unwitting, or under duress, or was a mistake. How can the term be used to teach that only one who acts alone is liable? And the Gemara explains, with regard to slaughtering outside, the phrase, that man, is not written once, it's written twice. And finally, we've arrived at a difference between the verse that prohibits slaughtering outside compared to the verse that prohibits offering up outside the holy temple. Here, that man, with regard to slaughtering outside, there are two instances of the term that man. First, blood shall be imputed to that man, he has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people. One use of the phrase teaches that only one who acts with intent is liable to receive karas, and the second use of the phrase teaches that only one who acts alone is liable. The Gemara has now justified its claim that the liability of one who slaughters an offering outside for the sake of some purpose other than to God is derived from the phrase ish. So accordingly, the Gemara asks, but why do I need the term to the Lord? And the Gemara explains, it is written to exclude from liability one who slaughters the Yom Kippur scapegoat outside the courtyard. Which is interesting because the Yom Kippur scapegoat is not slaughtered, right? It is killed, but it is not shechted. It's not slaughtered like the slaughter of a kosher animal, either for eating or to bring it up as an offering in the holy temple. The scapegoat is a unique type of offering that is stoned to death, which means thrown off a cliff on Yom Kippur. But at any rate, it is brought as an offering outside and to the Lord, so to speak, and done outside the courtyard, but it does not trigger violation for this, obviously, because there's an explicit command to do it in the Torah. Okay, the Mishna teaches the greater stringency with regard to offering up outside is that two people who grasped a knife and together slaughtered an offering outside the courtyard are exempt. But if two grasped a limb from an offering and together offered it up outside, they are liable. The sages taught in a Baraisa. What law is alluded to when the verse states, ish, that offers up a burnt offering or sacrifice, that any man that offers up a burnt offering or sacrifice? The verse teaches that two people who grasped a limb of an offering and offered it up together outside the courtyard are liable. It is necessary for the verse to teach this, as one might have thought to say, could this not be derived through a kal v'chomer inference if, with regard to slaughtering outside the courtyard, one who slaughters for the sake of an ordinary purpose, right, meaning not for God, is liable, and nevertheless 2 who grasped a knife and together slaughtered an offering are exempt, then with regard to offering up outside the courtyard, where one who offers up for the sake of an ordinary purpose is exempt, is it not logical that 2 who grasped a limb and offered it up will also be exempt? You might have thought that. You'd be wrong. So to counter this, the verse states, ish, to teach that they are liable for offering up together. This is the statement of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yosei says that the law concerning this case is derived from a different verse. The term that man, hahu, Leviticus 17:9, which is in the singular, indicates that only one who acts alone is liable, but not 2 who act together. So the Brisa asks, if so, what law is alluded to when the verse states ish? The Brisa explains, Rabbi Yosei holds that the reason the Torah uses the doubled term ish is that the Torah spoke in the language of people, and no laws are to be derived from it. It's, just taking a step back, that's interesting because this comes up all the time. Sometimes, right, when a verb is doubled for emphasis, or where a noun is doubled here to amplify, not just a man, but any man. So sometimes, because the word has been doubled, this invites interpretation. We can learn out an additional law from it. But according to some opinions, no. That's just the way biblical Hebrew works. What they wanted to communicate is any man. Or what they wanted to communicate is focus on this action. That's why it's being doubled. And so sometimes a sage will say, no, the Torah is just speaking the language that it speaks so that we understand what it's saying. Other sages will say, no, because the word was doubled, this invites interpretation and we can derive an additional law from it. The Gemara asks, and Rabbi Shimon, what does he derive from the term from the term that man, hahu? And the Gemara explains, this term, that man, hahu, is necessary to exclude from liability one whose violation was unwitting, or who was compelled to act under duress, or who was mistaken. The Gemara notes, and Rabbi Yosei derives that law from the fact that the verse could have stated who, and instead stated hahu, right? Him, or instead it said that man. The Hebrew word for that, hahu, is formed of the definite article ha and the pronoun hu. And Rabbi Shimon does not expound any law from the fact that the verse could have stated who and instead stated hahu. He holds that the expanded form is used because the Torah spoke in the language of people. The Gemara asks, and as for Rabbi Yosei, from the fact that he holds that nothing is to be derived from the phrase ish, written with regard to offering up, as he holds that the Torah spoke in the language of people, then also with regard to that phrase, any man, ish, written with regard to slaughtering, since he holds that the Torah spoke in the language of people, he should not derive any law from it. But if so, from where does he derive that one who slaughters outside for the sake of an ordinary purpose, meaning not for the sake of God, is liable? And the Gemara answers, he derives it from the verse, blood shall be imputed to that man. He has shed blood, which teaches that even one who slaughters for the sake of an ordinary man is liable. The Mishna teaches, if one unwittingly offered up part of an offering outside the courtyard, and then in a different lapse of awareness offered up other parts of that offering, and then again in another lapse of awareness offered up yet other parts, he is liable to bring a sin offering for each act of offering up. This is the statement of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yosei says he is liable to bring only one sin offering. Right? So it was one offering. It was slaughtered. And according to the majority, it could have been slaughtered outside. But the point is now it's being offered up to God outside the holy temple. And he's not doing it intentionally to bring it up outside the holy temple to violate this prohibition. Either he thinks he's inside the temple, he doesn't realize he's outside the temple, or what else is unwitting, or he thinks that the action that he's doing is not offering up. Okay, so it's somehow unwitting. That's why there's going to be sin offerings involved. He's not doing this intentionally. That's why chorus is off the table. He's just he's violating this law unwittingly, and therefore he's going to have to bring sin offerings. But the point is that he brings up more than the minimum measure, so parts of the flesh of this offering in 3 different lapses of awareness, right? So, he didn't realize he was doing this. He did it. Then he's like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done that. I was wrong. But then he forgets again and does this 3 times. So does he bring up 3 separate sin offerings? It's the same sin, using the same animal, parts from the same offering. Or is it just 1 sin offering? And the sages are disagreeing. One says 3 sin offerings, the other says 1. Now, the Gemara cites 2 opinions concerning this case. Reish Lakish says, the dispute in the Mishnah concerns 4 or 5 limbs that were offered up in different lapses of awareness. As one sage, Rabbi Yosef, holds when it is written to sacrifice it in Leviticus 17:9, which teaches the law that for offering up a complete item, one is liable, but that one is not liable for offering up an incomplete item. And it is written with regard to a whole animal. Accordingly, liability to bring a sin offering is incurred only once one offers up the entire animal, even if that was done limb by limb. But if you only offer one of the limbs of the animal, you didn't offer up a whole animal, you haven't triggered violation at all. And the other sage, Rabbi Shimon, holds that the verse is written with regard to each and every limb of the animal. Accordingly, one is liable for each limb that he offered up. But with regard to offering up one limb in parts, everyone agrees that a person is liable to bring only 1 sin offering. According to Rabbi Shimon, this would apply even if that were the only limb that was offered up. According to Rabbi Yosef, this would apply only if the rest of the animal had already been brought up, offered up. And Rabbi Yochanan says everyone agrees that one is liable even for offering up a single limb. Furthermore, if an offering is slaughtered outside the courtyard, everyone agrees that one is liable only once an entire limb has been offered up. The dispute in the Mishnah concerns 1 limb from an offering that was slaughtered inside the courtyard, that was then taken outside and offered up in parts, during different lapses of awareness, as one sage, Rabbi Shimon, holds that for offerings that are fit to be burned inside the temple, that become incomplete, and are then instead offered up outside the temple, one is liable. Accordingly, one is liable for each part of the limb. And the other sage, Rabbi Yosef, holds that one is exempt for offering up part of a limb outside the courtyard. Accordingly, liability is incurred only once all the parts of the limb have been offered up, once it's completed. But with regard to offering up 4 or 5 limbs, everyone agrees that one is liable for each and every limb, as they understand the phrase to sacrifice it is written with regard to each and every limb, right? So a complete thing, according to one view, is the whole animal. According to the other view, a limb would constitute a complete thing, an it that is being sacrificed. But all would agree that less than a limb doesn't trigger liability until you complete whatever is the minimum thing to violate the law, either a whole limb or a whole animal. And Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with the opinion of Ula. As Ula says, everyone in the Mishnah concedes with regard to offerings that are fit to be burned inside the temple courtyard that became incomplete and were instead offered up outside the courtyard, that one is liable. Any part of something that was slaughtered inside the courtyard and then was taken and offered up outside is going to trigger liability to Karis for this prohibition. They disagree only with regard to offerings that, having been slaughtered outside, are unfit, and so will be burned outside, that became incomplete, and then were offered up outside. As one sage, Rabbi Yosef, holds that one is exempt, and the other sage, Rabbi Shimon, holds that one is liable. And there are those who say that there is a different version of Ula's statement, according to which he agrees with his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan. Ula says, everyone in the Mishnah concedes, with regard to offerings, that having been slaughtered outside the temple, they are unfit, and so they should be burned outside, right? Once you have slaughtered outside, you shouldn't have done that, but you did. Okay, what's next? We don't then offer it up, which would violate the second prohibition. What do you do with it? You have to get rid of it. You have to dispose of it. How do you do that? You burn it, right? You just burn it. You don't offer it up, you burn it. But then they didn't burn it. Instead, they offered it up, right? So according to the second version of what Ula is saying, everyone in the Mishnah concedes with regard to offerings that, having been slaughtered outside the temple, they're unfit, and so they are to be burned outside the holy temple. But they became incomplete, and they were offered up outside. At least some part of it was offered up outside. So according to this, they are exempt, right? Because it was incomplete. So therefore, it was not a whole animal being offered up outside. Says Ula, they disagree only with regard to offerings that are fit to be burned inside that became incomplete and were instead offered up outside. Once it's fit to be burned inside, any part of that, I guess minimum measure olive bulb, that you offer up outside will trigger liability. According to one sage, Rabbi Yosef, who holds that he is exempt, so not according to Rabbi Yosef, but rather according to Rabbi Shimon, who holds that one is liable for any amount of a fit offering from that was slaughtered inside that is brought outside. Any amount offered up will trigger liability. And the statement of Shmuel's father, bringing in a new sage, disagrees with the first version of Ula's statement. As Shmuel's father says, in accordance with whose opinion do we restore limbs that were dislodged from upon the altar to the altar? In accordance with whose opinion? Is it not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef recorded in the Mishnah? Shmuel's father assumes that Rabbi Yosef holds that incomplete limbs are never offered up on the altar, even if they were dislodged from the altar. Accordingly, he holds that one is not liable for offering them up outside the temple courtyard because presumably they are meaningless in this context. And this is contrary to the first version of Ula's opinion, according to which one is liable for offering up incomplete offerings if they were slaughtered inside the courtyard. Evidently, Ula holds that an incomplete limb that was dislodged from the altar should be restored to the altar. I'm almost done. Questions or comments? Get them in now. The Mishnah teaches, our Mishnah, Rabbi Yosef says, and one is liable for offering up an offering outside the courtyard only once he offers it up on top of an altar that was erected there. What we've been doing so far today, tough, complicated, a lot to keep track of. The differences between where it was slaughtered, where it became incomplete, what is complete. This is a more straightforward concept, right? So now we're saying it's prohibited to bring up an offering to God outside the holy temple. What does offer up mean? Right? It means that the flesh of a sacrificial animal is being burned on the altar. Altar, right? So this would seem to require an altar. What constitutes an altar? Does it mean you have to put several stones together so that you have built an altar? Or if you have a convenient rock or boulder right there, can you, if you put the meat on top of that and burn it, have you offered up? That's a simple question, right? Rabbi Yosef says one is liable for offering up an offering outside the courtyard only once he offers it up on top of an altar that he built there. Rabbi Shimon says, no, even if he offered it up on a rock or a stone rather than an altar, he is liable. Rav Huna says, what is the reason for Rabbi Yosef? What is Rabbi Yosef's reason? As it is written, and Noah built an altar to the Lord. Right? When the flood ended and the waters receded and Noah came out from the ark, he offered up offerings. Right? This is why there was a male and a female, one pair of every kind of animal, but there were 7 pairs of the kosher animals. Right? So when they came out, they could make offerings. They could also eat meat. And not, make a species go extinct, right? So Noah, when he brought those offerings up to God, he built an altar. And that means he didn't just find some rock and offer them up on top of the rock. He built an altar. So that's the precedent. Noah was particular to use an altar rather than one of the available rocks. So apparently this is because placing an item upon an altar is the only act that can be considered offering up. Rabbi Yochanan said, so what is the reason of Rabbi Shimon? As it is written, and Manoach took the kid with the meal offering and offered it up upon the rock to the Lord. Now that's much later. That's in Judges 13:19. So evidently, even placing an offering upon a rock is considered an act of offering up. So the Gemara explains how each Tana interprets the verse that supports the other. But also, according to the other opinion, Rabbi Shimon's, isn't it written, and Noah built an altar to the Lord? How does he explain that verse? And the Gemara answers that verse is referring merely to an elevated place and not specifically to an altar. But also, according to the other opinion, Rabbi Yosef's, isn't it written, and Manoach took and offered it upon the rock? How does he explain that verse? And the Gemara answers the use of a rock in that case was a provisional edict issued in exigent circumstances by the angel who visited Manoach, and so one cannot derive normative law from it. An angel told him to do it, exceptional case. In the absence of an angel telling us to do something, we don't do it. And if you wish, say instead that the reason of Rabbi Shimon is as it is taught in Baraisa. Rabbi Shimon says that the verse states, and the priest shall sprinkle the blood upon the altar of the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting, in Leviticus 17:6. So from here it is apparent that only in the sanctuary is there a requirement for an altar, but a specifically erected altar is not required in order to offer up on a private altar during those periods when it is permitted, right? Brief periods in Jewish history when private altars for individual offerings were permitted, but for the most part, after the Torah was given, almost very few years when that was permissible. There were some times, but they were few. But they exist, and we often refer to them. Okay, so let's just get back to here. From here it is apparent that only in the sanctuary is there a requirement for an altar, but a specifically erected altar is not required in order to offer up on a private altar during periods when this is permitted. Therefore, one who offered up outside the courtyard on a rock or a stone is liable. Now the Gemara questions the formulation of the Baraisa. If the Baraisa was referring to offering up during a period when the use of private altars is permitted, it should have concluded one who offered up outside on a rock or a stone has fulfilled his obligation. Why does it state instead that he is liable? And the Gemara explains, this is what the Baraisa is saying. Since there is no requirement for a specifically erected altar during a period when private altars are permitted, therefore, during a period when the use of private altars is prohibited, one who offers up outside on a rock or a stone is liable. And Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Hanina, raises a dilemma. Features that are indispensable with regard to the altar in the temple are the corner, the ramp leading to the altar, the base of the altar, and the square shape. And we talked earlier in this tract about why those features were needed, because they were required for certain aspects of the sacrificial process in the Holy Temple. So what is the law with regard to whether they are also indispensable for the validity of a private altar during the periods when it is permitted to use private altars? And note that even though the temple was destroyed nearly 2,000 years ago, the second temple was, we are not permitted to bring offerings up on private altars. Ever since the temple was constructed, that was the end of private altars. Private altars was only earlier when Joshua led the children of Israel into the land. And so the tabernacle was, situated not in a permanent abode in Jerusalem. It was understood to be in kind of a temporary abode. And so even though the national altar was the only place to bring communal offerings, private offerings could be brought during some of those years until it was not possible. Okay, so what they're asking here is, okay, well, when private altars were permissible, what features did those private altars need to have? And Rabbi Yirmiyah said to him, it is taught in the Baraisa, the corner, the ramp, the base, and the square shape are all indispensable for the validity of a great public altar, but those features are not indispensable for the validity of a small private altar. Again, during those brief periods when private altars were permitted. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 13. We'll pick it up tomorrow at the top of 109a, the very top, with Mishnah number 3. Let me take a few comments. One comment from Sharon. If the blood was properly sprinkled on the altar, making the sacrificial intent complete, but it was offered up outside, does the sacrifice remain effective of intent? Wait a minute. Okay, so I think what Sharon is saying, it's such a good question, Sharon. The sprinkling, so the animal was slaughtered properly inside the holy temple. It wasn't disqualified. The blood was collected by a priest in a service vessel, conveyed to the altar, and sprinkled on the altar in the holy temple. The flesh was supposed to be brought up on the altar at that point, right? That's when the flesh gets brought up, after the sprinkling of the blood. The flesh gets taken out of the holy temple and now gets brought up on an outside altar. In my opinion, that's exactly what we're talking about. Meat that was fit for the inner altar was now taken out and brought to this outside altar. It was rendered unfit when it leaves the courtyard, but nevertheless, because of the discussion we had earlier today, when it's offered up on that outer altar, the person who does that, who offers it up on that outer altar, and if two people, they're both liable, they are liable for violating this prohibition. If they did it intentionally, karas. They did it unwittingly, sin offering. Definitive answer. I could be wrong, but in my opinion, that's a definitive answer. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Tuesday, regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a good night.